Hi, and welcome to Unanchored. My name is Shaheed, and I'm your host. But don't call me an anchor, because this show isn't that. It's not the news, and I'm not an anchor, but more on that in a bit. First, what is Unanchored? What can you expect on this podcast? This is a show that's been a long time coming for me, and in many ways, it's what I think I've been waiting for my entire professional life, and maybe even beyond that. This podcast specifically feels like a personal calling for me. But this show is not all about me. In fact, I've got a really good friend who has a similar story as me, and he's going to be hosting this show with me. So to talk about what you can expect from the show and what it means for us to be unanchored, I'd like to welcome Zameer Karim. Zam, how's it going?
Hey, good. I'm excited to get this going.
Yeah, me too. And this is not the first podcast we've done together. It's not the last podcast we're going to do together either.
Likely not.
But it's a special one. I would say it's different than all the other ones that we've done. And let's just jump into who we are and why we're doing this podcast. Really, at the core of it, we're two failed broadcasters. Would you agree or disagree? I think you would like to disagree with me when I characterize us as that.
Yeah, maybe failed is not the. I love that. I love that word because maybe we're evolving broadcasters, but broadcasting has evolved into podcasting, and yeah. As two failed broadcasters is the best way to describe where we are at this current state, at this current time.
Yeah, so we've known each other for, well, I don't even know how many years.
I'm 34, you're 33. We met when we were 8. So
yeah, there you go.
27 years?
Yeah, so almost 30 years we've known each other. And, our relationship has evolved, our interests have evolved, our experiences are different, but many of them are also the same. And throughout that time, we've kind of, been by each other's sides in new experiences, even though we've gone our separate ways and had new experiences as well. Zam was my best man at my wedding, and I'm married with kids and a mortgage and blah blah blah. And Zam, for a long time, you lived sort of a nomad's life.
A nomad bachelor's life, and which changed as of 9 months ago.
Yeah. That's interesting timing, isn't it? 9 months ago.
No kids involved. But I am now a kept man.
Yep. And you're better for it.
Yeah. Oh, and I had this discussion, and we'll probably have this discussion a lot about. I feel like how I've evolved in 9 months just being in a long-term relationship. Yeah. And we'll probably get into at some point talk about these relationships, and I will be the first one to say that, and you'll be the first one to know that this is the first long-term relationship that I've been in, and I feel like it's changed me and helped me evolve for the better.
Yeah, and hopefully the last, Sam. But we won't get into too much of that. So what is this show, and why are we doing it? And I said we're two failed broadcasters, and really what, aside from sports as children and our cultural backgrounds and just proximity bringing us together, what really has bonded us in our adult lives is our pursuit of a career in broadcasting. We went to the same college for broadcast training. We both left that college looking for work. We both eventually ended up getting work in the industry. I was a news and sports reporter and anchor for a couple of years, and you produced some news shows and sports shows and reported as well on news and sports, both in Canada and abroad. And neither of us do that anymore for a living, and for a variety of reasons. But one thing that hasn't changed in sort of who we are and what we do, despite our quote unquote failure in the broadcast industry, is our desire to speak to an audience, to broadcast whether facts or experiences or conversations. And that's not a surprise, because before we went to BCIT, before we worked in the broadcast industry, you and I and some others hosted a podcast called The Press Box.
Yeah, that was our first, I guess, toe in the water. At that point, we were, I guess, we weren't professional broadcasters at the time, and the equipment that we had at the time would definitely say so. But it was a great first experience to essentially essentially what we're doing now is an evolution of what we started, or what you started with the press box all those many years ago, almost 15 years ago now. And uh, it, it's an opportunity now for us to kind of to take those skills that we developed as broadcasters, as professional broadcasters, and now bring them into a more modern view in 2020 compared to what we were doing in 2006 and 2007.
A more modern view, a more evolved podcast arena. You know, we started podcasting. It was myself and Nabil Karim, who is an anchor at ESPN right now. We started podcasting in January of 2006, and podcasting really wasn't a mainstream thing. It was far from it. And to get into it, you needed to know a little coding. You needed to pay for hosting. You needed to find gear that allowed you to talk into a computer with a microphone that wasn't expensive, which wasn't actually a thing back then. If you were going to cheap out, you were going to get really cheap quality. Whereas now you can get a mic for less than $100, and it's almost broadcast studio quality. So things have changed, and certainly podcasts have become mainstream. And it's funny because I think we've come full circle in that, we started as podcasters, went into broadcasting, and have come back to podcasting, and many others have done the same. And not just people, but entire networks and industries. The broadcast industry, you'd be hard pressed to find any major news or entertainment or sports station not have its own podcast these days.
Oh yeah, and that's how stations and television networks are getting more reach, and are speaking to a younger audience. And like,
And it's where the
think
people
about,
are online on their phones, right? Nobody's watching TV or listening to the radio anymore.
not at the same rate. There, people are still watching live broadcasts, but they're not sitting through an hour long news show like they did 20, 50, even 10 years ago.
Especially if there's Twitter, which reports the news in real time, right?
Exactly. But obviously, the thing that journalism does well, it not only curates the news, but it also cuts through what's important and what's not important. And that's the value of journalism. And now that has now moved to the online realm, and we can have these discussions here on podcasts, and on so many different podcasts that are having these discussions. And we are going through this podcasting renaissance right now, and it really is becoming the new mainstream when it comes to media.
Well, it's interesting you should bring up the word journalism, because I do want to talk about that. But before I do talk about that, what I also want to talk about is the context that we're recording in here, the societal context, the historical context that we're recording in here. You and I are talking via Zoom right now. You're cooped up in the interior of BC, and I'm in the mainland in Vancouver and Surrey, and neither of us are really leaving our house to do a whole lot, because we're launching this podcast during the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And I can say that without really describing it, because anyone and everyone in the world will really know about what we're talking about. And while this podcast has been in the works for a long time, once we got to the nitty gritty of recording our interviews and recording this first episode, the world changed. And I wonder what the podcast landscape will be when we come out of the world, or come into this new world, which we're starting to get to, with people traveling less, with people working out less outside of their homes, with people driving less, right? Will podcasting be something that is as popular as it was in the last couple of years, in 2018, 2019, where it really, really took off and was at its peak? And it was a way for people to connect with others beyond themselves, and other topics beyond what they know, and all these ways of connecting. And now we've been forced to connect in a different way, that I wonder if a lot of people will want to go back to podcasts. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I know I definitely don't listen to my podcast as regularly as I was before, because we're not traveling as much. So when do I get a chance to listen to them? When I'm vacuuming the house, or when I'm cleaning, or doing stuff like that. But like, now there's just so many good there's so much great content out there, and there's so many good people, strong opinions, strong journalists, strong personalities that are doing so many amazing shows. And we're now entering this new landscape where is it a saturated market?
Well, that's
Likely.
interesting. Yeah, it's interesting because and our listeners will hear this in our next episode, and I guess our first official episode with a guest with Nabil Karim, who we've already talked to and we've recorded, and you may be listening to this when that episode is already published. So if it is, go have a listen. We talked about with him that in 2006 and 2007 when we were doing the press box, maybe we were a little too early in the podcast game, and now we've come full circle, and like you're mentioning, maybe we're a little too late. Maybe there's too many podcasts and the appetite for podcasting is gone. But I guess, from my perspective, I do this because I love it. I love talking into a microphone. I like talking about things that I'm passionate about, and I like talking to people who share those same interests and passions and who can broaden my understanding of other topics, and I'm sure you're the same.
Oh, for sure. And one person I've listened to a few interviews with this one person, Judd Apatow, and Judd, in his early days, in his like early 20s, he would call up comics and hosts and just ask them for an informational interview, and essentially he would conduct these hour long or however much time these hosts or comics would give him. He would conduct these long interviews and record them onto tape, and he's got copies of interviews with like some of the greats, Johnny Carson and Don Rickles, people that are unfortunately no longer with us. But uh for this is that for me at least, and I feel like a lot of it is, it's like that for you. We're gonna have hopefully have the chance to talk to some really interesting people doing really interesting things, and we want to find out why and how and what gave them that inspiration.
Yeah, so in case we haven't mentioned it yet, which I don't think we have, shows how good we're at broadcasting. But what we're going to do is Zam and I are going to be hosting this show on a regular basis, and we'll talk to each other about our lives, about what's going on in the world, what's interesting. But we're also going to have guests to talk to you about their lives and their expertise and to learn from them and to share their experiences with our listeners. And we talked about Nabil Karim, who's going to be our first guest. He's one example who has similar experiences and interests to us, but he's somebody who isn't a failed broadcaster, who got to where he wanted to be as a sports broadcaster, and it has some really good lessons that he's learned along the way about how to do that, to achieve your goals. And so that'll be a really interesting conversation for sure. But I wanted to talk about the word journalism that you brought up, and I'm not sure what we're doing is journalism. Of course, by its nature, a journalist asks questions and gets answers. But one thing that led me to leave journalism as a broadcast journalist was that I was doing something that maybe I didn't ever intend to do, and that was, hold politicians to account and cover the accidents and murders and all that on a daily basis, and really uncover facts and report them to the public, and to be that translator of information to the public. I never really intended to do that. What I really enjoyed doing was having interesting conversations, telling stories in a unique way, and I didn't really feel like I got that out of news. Sports was also one of my big goals, and I certainly wasn't getting that out of news, and so I left, among other reasons. So I'm not sure what we're doing here is journalism, or is it storytelling and conversation? What is it in your mind?
Well, journalism is, in my opinion, is storytelling and being able to convey a message to the public. And yeah, we maybe not are actually conveying a direct message. We're just having interesting conversations with interesting people. And yeah, it might not go to the traditional definition of journalism, but it does go to our passion for storytelling, to our passion for just having an interest in the world and having an interest in people around us. And yeah, you're right. It might not be direct journalism, but I guess journalism is definitely encompassed within our form of storytelling.
Yeah, for sure. And one thing I liked about journalism is that It instilled in me a comfort in asking tough questions, in asking questions that I wanted answers to, despite what that might make the other person feel. But couple that with my life experiences after being in journalism, which have led me to be a more sensitive and empathetic person. I think that's a great combo for this show, is that, you want to ask tough questions. You want to ask questions that you want answers to and you think will be interesting to your listeners, but you want to do it in a way that is respectful and empathetic and sensitive to the person on the other side of the microphone and the other side of the screen in this case, which wasn't always the case when I was in news. It was kind of getting the answer at all costs, and I didn't really like that.
No, and I'm with you as well. And I think that's another reason why I would consider myself a failed broadcaster is
There we go. I've
not
turned you.
yeah not being willing or able to ask the question about someone whose loved one just died, or like just randomly calling someone on the phone. Oh, I'm sorry to hear about the loss of your brother. uh and I spoke with a mentor of mine during my time in the industry, and we both, like, one of the reasons why I couldn't cut it in news, and he couldn't cut it in news, is asking those types of questions, knocking on someone's door, and then trying to ask them questions while they're bawling because they've just lost a loved one.
Yeah,
That
absolutely.
Yeah, those are conversations I don't necessarily want to have, but uh sometimes it's an opportunity also to get the story, like find out about someone who has passed away, and sometimes it is hard at that time as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you and I will both agree that there is a very, very important place in our world for journalism and good journalism, that, that uncovers facts, that holds public people to account and private people to account, and that, informs the public in a way that, helps them. And even if we're not working in that sphere, I think we both can agree that there is a need for it, and it being a dying industry, there is a need for some reinvigoration in it to keep it alive.
Oh, for sure. And podcasts in so many different ways have filled that void, and there's so many great shows that do some great journalistic work.
Yeah, for sure. But I was maybe more referring to the fact that podcasts, they're unvetted. Nobody really holds them to account until they get to a large
Mm-hmm.
stage, and so there is a lot of misinformation out there, and that's where journalism does come in. Even though people will have their criticisms of journalism, but when you talk about storytelling, that's one thing that I am super passionate about, and I've learned over the years, since I left journalism and television news reporting and broadcasting in that traditional environment, that I want to tell stories that are really personal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I've learned that I want to do that in film. I wrote and directed and produced my first short film, a narrative film, which you helped with, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a way that I can tell stories that are personal to me and I'm passionate about. But this is another way for me and for us to do that. And so, we've talked to a few people already, and we'll be releasing these episodes in the coming weeks, who have similar interests and stories to us. And a good example is somebody like Tamara Taggart, who is a former broadcaster, who lost her job, and after a very successful career in broadcasting, but then who also has since and during her time in broadcasting gone through some really tough things in life that I'm sure people can learn from, and certainly I was able to learn from myself. So what's the reason? I guess for you, how do you want to benefit personally from this podcast?
Well, we've already had some really interesting conversations, and talking about so many different things that I have a little bit of expertise around, and things that I have no idea about, I'm interested to learn more about. And yeah, this podcast is called Unanchored, but this podcast could also be described as this is a learning experience for for us and for people that want to listen and learn about different things and learn about different aspects of the world.
Yeah, and different ways to get to different places, right? And I think that's where Unanchored comes in. There's that pun and that play on words that both of us are not anchors in the traditional sense of the news anchor. We've kind of come off the anchor desk and are now doing this podcast thing. But it also means that we've kind of lifted the anchor from our feet, whatever's been dragging us down, and gone on our own paths to find our way to where we are. And that might be this podcast, even though we're going to other places as well. But our guests will have also had similar experiences. They have gone through experiences that they maybe had to leave and become unanchored from, and maybe that they didn't anticipate, and really best laid plans are the ones that don't necessarily work out. And so I think it'll be really interesting for our listeners to learn from people's journey to where they are, because no one's journey to the same destination is the same, right? And I think that's what I'm hoping to get across with the idea of being unanchored.
Oh, for sure. And one term I think that will fit well to fit, not, I don't know about the main theme. It's not the main theme of the podcast, but we're talking to people that have all dealt with adversity and how they've gone about dealing with that adversity and coming through the other side. And had all these people that we're talking to have a certain life perspective, and they can offer, that they are offering to us, and that they can offer to other people as well.
Yeah, for sure. And adversity, inspiration, and experiences, that's kind of what we're looking to unearth, so to speak. Like we were saying, maybe it's its own type of journalism, and we'll see where it goes. But I'm really excited to get going. And this is, we did the press box in 2006. We thought of starting a podcast about being in our 30s, and that didn't really take off after one recording. And then we've been doing a podcast about the Vancouver Canucks, Towel Power, which is kind of on hold right now, and I'm not sure where it will go after this, with the sports scene on hold. But it'd be nice to continue. But we've done a lot of podcasts together and had even more ideas. But this one has kind of grown quite quickly and organically into what it is, and I'm excited to see where it goes, for sure.
Yeah, me too. And I'm excited for other people to hear the interviews that we have already recorded, and to do more interviews and get a chance to talk to more people that are doing really interesting things, and get a chance to like, we've already had 2 Olympians that we've already talked to, and I'm excited I'm excited to share those stories and share those interviews with anyone who wants to listen.
Yeah, so we've had some broadcasters, we've had some Olympians, we've had an actor, a comedian, and some others upcoming, that filmmakers, and there's just going to be a good cross section. These are all things that I'm interested in and you're interested in, but there will be others out there who will be interested in bits and pieces of that as well. And predominantly because we're in Canada and we're proudly Canadian, we've talked to all Canadians so far, but we'll see where this takes us, and I hope our listeners will enjoy it. And Zam, I'm looking forward to this.
Me too. I'm really excited. Already told a few people about the podcast in passing, and they're really excited to hear some of the interviews that we've already done. And based off of those reactions, I'm really excited to give people the opportunity to listen to what we've already done so far, and where we're headed. I'm really excited. This is an opportunity that I feel like I've been wanting to get to for a few years, and now being the chance to do that.
Yeah, for sure. And if you've listened to this episode and you listen to the first couple with our guests and you enjoy it, it would be really helpful if you shared the podcast and those episodes with your friends and family. If you think that they would be interested too, that would definitely help us in the ability to to invite other guests on and to continue this this journey that we're on. Hopefully, I've done lots of podcasts like we've talked about. The Press Box, it lasted for years, and we did lots of episodes. I don't know what the total number was. That was the one that I stuck with the longest, but I haven't found another idea that I have been as passionate about and drawn to as this one. And we've already recorded almost as many episodes of any other podcast that I've done outside of the Press Box. So I think that's a good omen.
Yeah, for sure. And before we've even gotten started, we've had such great response from people that want to be on the podcast, and people that we've had on the podcast have also suggested other people that we should also talk to as well. And we ask those people to make those connections.
Okay, so before we wrap up here, let's put it out there. Who is your, in 1 year or 5 years or 10 years, however long it takes for us to get to the point where we can get that person on the show, who is that person for you?
I would love to have a conversation with Justin Trudeau.
All right. Okay. That's shooting high. I like it. I've been saying a couple recently, and this might change as my interests change, but one of them for me is Denis Villeneuve. He is a director. He's a Canadian. He directs films, and he's made a couple very personal and Canadian films, and kind of got him noticed. One of them was called Incendie, and the other one was called Polytechnique. They're both French movies, and Polytechnique is about the shooting in Quebec, that a mass shooting in Quebec many years ago at a college, which killed a lot of people, and he made a movie about it. But he's gone on to direct Blade Runner 2049, Prisoners, Arrival, Sicario. He's a massive film director, doing a movie called Dune. I'm doing it in 2 parts based on a book series, and I'd love to talk to him. And then in that vein, I would also love to talk to, because I've been watching a lot of Schitt's Creek, Dan Levy and Eugene Levy. Get those 2 Canadian stars on this show to talk about their interesting experiences through the entertainment world, and coming up with this really cool idea, one near the end of his career and one really to really rocket launch his career in Dan. Yeah. Any other ones you want to mention?
I guess if we're shooting for the stars here, I would love to talk to Dave Chappelle.
Nice. Okay.
Dave Chappelle is one of the greatest comics of all time. Recently, received the Mark Twain prize at the Kennedy Center, and he's been a long time stand-up comic, and his story is interesting, and where he was on a meteoric rise as well, and
became unanchored.
He came unanchored and left his show when it was at its heights, and then disappeared for many years, and now has come back and is one of the top stand-up comics in the world.
Yeah. All right. Well, shoot for the stars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll leave it at that. Thanks for listening to the first episode, Zam. Thanks for doing this with me, and like I said, excited, ready to go, and we'll talk again soon with somebody else and have another interesting conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be a good time, and be sure to stay tuned, and as you enjoy the episodes, be sure to share them around with your friends and family as well.
All right. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.